All right, we're going to talk about lesson 10.3 today. So we're really talking about the same thing, factoring trinomials. The difference is this is just going to be in a different form. In the last lesson, 10.2, we talked about how to factor things that did not have anything being multiplied by x squared. Or if they did have something being multiplied by x squared, I could factor that out first because it was also being multiplied by the other two numbers. In this case, there will be something being multiplied by x squared that's not being multiplied by the other two numbers. So I'm going to have to use a different process to factor. So my first step, last time we talked about how I have to find the numbers that multiply together to equal the last one and add together to equal the middle one. This time we're going to say what two numbers multiply together to equal this times this and add together to equal the middle one. So for example, if I have 3x squared plus 7x plus 2, instead of saying what multiplies together to equal 2 and adds together to equal 7, since there's something being multiplied by x squared and I can't factor out that 3, I say what multiplies together to equal 3 times 2, which is 6, and adds together to equal 7. So obviously that would be 6 and 1. Now, instead of using parentheses and just doing x plus 6 and x plus 1 like I did with last, I cannot do that. So my next step is going to be to rewrite this middle term as the sum of those two. So I'm going to leave 3x squared, but now instead of 7x, I'm going to do 6x plus 1x, which is the same as 7x, plus 2. So I'm going to replace this with my two factors that I just figured out. Next, I'm going to factor in groups of 2. So I'm going to take my first two numbers and I'm going to factor out 3x, so I'm left with x plus 1. And then I'm going to take my next two numbers. Since there's nothing that can be factored out there, I'm just going to put a 1. So if you can't factor out anything, just put a 1 there. The last step now is factor out common binomials. If you did it correctly, you should have, I did not do that correctly, you should have the same two binomials in parentheses. If you don't, you did it wrong. Go back and check your work. So notice I have x plus 2 in both of the parentheses. So I have this term and this term. I can factor out x plus 2 from both of those. And then what's in the next parentheses is what I have left outside, which is 3x plus 1. Now I have my answer, x plus 2 times 3x plus 1. And again, you can use FOIL first, outside, inside, last, and double check, and you should end up with this original answer. If you don't, you did it wrong. Let's look at another example right here. 2x squared minus 19x plus 24. Notice I have something being multiplied by x, and I can't factor that out because not all of these can be divided by 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is 2 times 24, that's 48. Then I'm going to go through my factors of 48 to figure out what two numbers can be multiplied together to equal 48 and added together to equal negative 19. Now remember my rules about signs from last lesson. So make sure you have those written down and you're going to follow those here as well. So since this is positive, this times this is positive, but they add together to equal a negative, the only way I can multiply two numbers to equal a positive and add them to equal a negative is if they are both negative. So I have to realize that both of these are going to be negative. I'm not going to work it out, but once you find the different factors for 48, you'll figure out that two of the factors for 48 are 3 and 16. Those also add together to equal 19, so I'm going to replace negative 19 with negative 3x and negative 16x plus 24. So two negatives multiply to equal a positive and add to equal a negative. Next, I'm going to group them in two. So I'm going to look at the first two and then the second two. So the first two, the only thing I can factor out is an x. And then when I divide these both by x, I'm left with 2x minus 3. For this, I can factor out 8 from both of these. So I'm going to factor out 8, and I'm going to be left with, actually negative 8, sorry. I'm going to factor out negative 8 since there's a negative there. And that's going to leave me with 2x, divide this by negative 8, divide this by negative 8, 2x minus 3. So again, the reason why I factored out the negative 8 instead of positive 8 is because I want this to be the same as this. Notice now this is the same as this. If it's not, I did it wrong. So these are the same, so those can be factored out of both of those terms. So I have 1, 2x plus 3, and then whatever I have left, that's my next parentheses. Again, make sure you don't put anything between them. So I have 2x minus 3 times x minus 8, and I can use FOIL to check it, and I should end up with that. Now over here we have something that's a little bit more tricky. It's a little bit different. And the reason why it's a little bit different is because I can factor out something that is in all of them. So anytime you're working these out, always check and ask yourself, is there something that can be divided by all three of these? Or you can use prime factorization either way. Notice that all three of these can be divided by 2, and they can all be divided by x. So before I do any of these steps, I'm going to factor out my 2x. And then everything else is going to be in parentheses. So when I divide this by 2x, I get 6x squared. Divide this by 2x, I get negative 13x. And then divide this by 2x, I get positive 5. So the first thing I check is, can every term be divided by something? If only 2, then you can't do it. But if all 3 can be divided by something, divide all 3 by everything they can be divided by. Put that outside and then leave what you have left inside. Now, I'm going to keep this till the end, but now I can just do my normal process on this inside. So again, 6 times 5 is 30. Notice that's a positive number, but this is negative. So to multiply together to equal positive and add together to equal a negative, they both have to be negative. So I'm going to say what times what equals 30, but adds together to equal negative 13. So I go through and I think, well, 15 and 2, but remember they both have to be negative, so I can't do that. So I check some other numbers and I figure out it's going to be 10 and 3. So I leave my 2x on the outside, and I'm going to change this to braces since I'm going to have more parentheses in a second here. And then I'm going to replace negative 13x with negative 10x and negative 3x. So that's my second step, right? Rewrite the middle as the sum of the two that I just figured out. Now I can group them. 6x and negative 10x, that's going to factor out a 2 and an x. So that's going to leave me with, when I divide this by 2x, it's going to leave me with 3x. When I divide this by 2x, that's going to leave me with negative 5. Over here, I can't factor anything out, but I want it to be 3x minus 5, so I'm going to factor out the negative 1. And that's going to leave me with 3x minus 5, just like this. Remember, I want those to be the same. Now I can factor out the 3x minus 5, and then what I have left is 2x on the outside and negative 1. So my answer is going to be 2x on the outside. Don't forget that 2 on the outside from the beginning. And then on the inside, 3x minus 5 and 2x minus 1. Finally, here I have another wrench thrown in here because I have a y at the end. But you know what? I don't need to worry about that. I'll worry about that at the end. 2 times negative 14 is negative 28. So notice I have a negative product but a positive sum. That means I'm going to have a negative and a positive number, and the bigger one's going to be positive if they're going to add up to equal a positive in the middle. So I go through my numbers and I say what multiplies together to equal negative 28 and adds together to equal 3. It's going to be 7 and 4. So we're going to have 2x squared. Remember, the bigger one's going to be positive, so 7's going to be positive. The smaller one's going to be negative. And notice I have an xy on both of them since this original one had an xy. That's very important. Next, I'm going to group them. What can be divided by both of these? Just x. So I'm left with 2x plus 7y. What can be divided by both of these? Negative 2y, They both have a y, and they both have a negative 2. So I'll be left with, if I divide these both by negative 2y, This is going to be 2x. This is going to be 7y. And again, that's what I should get. Remember, I want those to be the same. If they're not, I did it wrong. Now they both have 2x plus y, so I can factor out the 2x plus 7y. And then the other parentheses is what I have on the outside, x minus 2y. And again, I could use FOIL to check it and make sure I got my original problem. So hopefully that makes sense, and that'll be it for this lesson.